Last week, the Boy Scouts made a massive change to their policies, allowing for the first time openly gay scouts, but not scoutmasters. Still, it's a victory. We'll take what we can get for now. Maybe in a couple of years we can expand that to the scoutmasters. But you won't be surprised that some right-wingers did not take this news as a great success, and they lashed out on Twitter, as has become so popular for both the left and the right. Whenever you feel something strongly, you got to try to get those retweets and followers. So we're going to be profiling, this is coming, by the way, from, I believe this is Mediaite, 5 of the most hyperbolic and overblown responses to the Boy Scout policy change. First, Eric Erickson, now he's a blogger at Red State, and he had to say, "Yes, Christ is love, but he is also wrath, vengeance, and redemption. The modern emo Christ is a fiction. Christ could throw a punch." Now, God, at least in the Old Testament and some parts of the New Testament, certainly did fit the description here. He could throw a punch. He could wipe out entire populations. He could turn people to, pillars of salt and all that. Christ, though, he did throw the money changers out, but he seemed much more about turning the other cheek. I love that, when, we have fifth-hand people talking about what Christ said, that they're so sure that, hates gays, all that. Yeah, totally hates gays. Hates abortion, even though it's never mentioned. They're so sure of that. But when we have actual, second-hand statements from Jesus Christ on the Sermon on the Mount, I can't hear what you're saying. I have no idea what you're talking about. Turn the other cheek? No, I should get another Magnum. But anyway, this is a weird, look into their view of Christianity. We often attack this side of Christianity, and some reasonable Christians will say, well, you're being unfair, because that's not all of what Christianity is. It's not all homophobia. It's not all hating outsiders and Muslims and things like that. There's more to it. Not if you're Eric Erickson. So he's having none of this emo Christ who's, accepting of people. He wants to punch gay scouts in the face, apparently. Let's move on to Tony Perkins. You might know him from the Family Research Council, very outspoken, writes books on all that. He decided to say, Boy Scouts' decision, another casualty of moral compromise. I guess that's actually factually correct to some extent. This is a moral compromise, since we think that the Scout Masters should also be allowed to be gay. We didn't get that. So this is technically a compromise, but this isn't a casualty of moral compromise. This is the Boy Scouts of America being slowly dragged into the modern day and into a modern view of homosexuality. That's really all it is. That's why we say that it's a victory, albeit not a complete one. Tony Perkins, I apologize. You'll be okay. You can still have homophobic Scoutmasters, so you've got that going for you. Let's move on to Matt Barber. He's from Right Wing Watch, which you might be familiar with. He said, Boy Scouts of America, born February 8, 1910, died May 23rd, 2013. Rest in peace. Twitter, I totally understand, is the area where hyperbole sells. People want to retweet that shit. He got 12 retweets, 3 favorites. That's not bad. Maybe not as much as he was hoping for, but, he's not Tony Perkins. What can you expect? But yeah, it's dead. It's dead. That seems to imply that the only reason that the Boy Scouts of America existed in the first place was to provide a venue for young boys to race those little miniature cars and whittle free from the homosexual scourge. And now that they can also have homosexual kids there, what's the point? Look, I was never a Boy Scout. My brother was. I was never involved in that lifestyle. And if you're looking for someone to provide a defense for why we need Boy Scouts in America, I'm probably not the person to go to. But I would like to imagine that the learning discipline or respect for tradition or how to make a fire, that still holds value, even if it's a straight child and a homosexual child doing it at the same time. That's just my view. Let's move on to Todd Starnes of Fox News Radio, one of their hosts. He says, Boy Scouts of America votes to sexualize scouting. This is one of the 5 tweets that I wanted to focus on the most because it's such a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually happened last week. The problem was, when you ban homosexual scouts from being involved in the Boy Scouts, that's sexualizing the scouts. That's saying that your acceptance and your admittance into this organization is dependent on who you love and who you want to have sex with. Hadn't previously been the case. It didn't need to be the case. Now we're saying you cannot discriminate based on who someone wants to have sex with. You no longer even need to think about it. Doesn't have to be on your mind. Doesn't have to be in your pamphlets or on your website or anything like that. No concern whatsoever for who these children want to have sex with. That's the desexualizing of the Boy Scouts, you moron. Yeah, he got 15 retweets off of that, by the way. Not bad, again. More than I get for most of my stuff. By the way, to go back, Eric Erickson's got 82. That's more than like anything I've ever tweeted. So there is an audience for this sort of hate speech. Brian Fisher, by the way, who we've talked about in the Young Turks before, he is a talk radio host. He's involved in one of those hateful Christian organizations. He said, BSA now stands for Boy Sodomizers of America, because that's what will happen. Mark my words. Getting the most out of his 140 characters there. He can't go a week without saying something horrible, and we spotlight him only to remind you that there are awful old white Christians in this country who like nothing more than to discriminate against homosexuals. But once again, as is so often the case, when somebody is speaking out against homosexuality this fervently and this often, it seems like the only natural conclusion to make is that he is obviously gay himself. And I'm going to tell you why based on his 140 characters. That's what will happen. Now that they're allowed in, there has to be sodomy. Now, when I heard that they were allowing homosexual children into this organization, I thought, oh good, they don't need to be discriminated against. They can go whittle or learn how to row a canoe or something. That seems like what they do. But he immediately leaps to the sodomy. He couldn't go one day to just say, well, you know, this is too bad as a Christian. Didn't like that group. No. Immediately, his mind leaps to young boys sodomizing each other. This is so often what we see. I don't think that it's a coincidence. I think that to be opposed to this sort of just being involved in the fucking Boy Scouts, you have to have some sort of vested interest. And I think that in this case, at least in terms of Brian Fisher, the vested interest is not wanting to come to grips with his own identity as a homosexual that he is apparently, since he looks like he's probably 70, 80 years old, he has been holding within deeply for a very long time. But now that the Boy Scouts allow homosexual students, perhaps someday the love and compassion coming from these Boy Scouts can whittle through your hard exterior, Brian Fisher, and have you come to grips with the sort of person you actually are. So a day of victory for liberals, a day of victory for homosexuals in America. Still more work to be done. Don't let these crazy tweets stop you.